Talia Layton confidently strode down the corridors of the Barantathi station that orbited Palaxi 3. She passed through the currently empty holding pens for slaves being transferred to ships that would take them to the various slave markets in several sectors. The Barantathi were one of the biggest suppliers of the slave trade in the galaxy. They were known for their willingness to obtain slaves from any species, for a price. Very few humans ever travelled into Barantathi space because of their despisal of slavery and just the sheer distance between them. The station was even further away, being 50 light years from the Barantathi border with the Drazilians. But there was good money in the trade, and less than reputable humans had hauled unidentified cargoes to various parts of the galaxy. The humans' well-known distaste for slavery, and multiple instances of stomping it out where they could, meant those few human pilots were in high demand. After all, who would suspect a human-owned ship to carry slaves? Humans were prolific traders, seen in almost all systems in the galaxy, so another human vessel didn't stick out. This lets them move through parts of space that any slaver vessel would stick out like a sore thumb. In most cases, only the biggest organizations could pay their fees, and weren't shy about chastising anyone who interfered in their business. Aside from the curiosity of seeing their first human, most individuals did not approach a human first. Best to avoid their employer's attention. So not even station personnel said a word when she turned down a restricted corridor. It took several minutes to reach the hatchway she wanted. She knocked on the door in a specific pattern. 3 knocks, 2 knocks, and 3 knocks. After a moment, the hatchway slid open, and Talia stepped over the threshold into a large but sparsely furnished room. An older Barantathi stood up from a chair and walked to greet her. "Talia, it is good to see you again. It's been too long," he exclaimed, with a smile on his face. Smiling back, Talia returned the greeting. "How are you doing, Barathox?" After exchanging pleasantries, Talia got to the point. "So, what do you have for me?" Barathox stood up and led her to another door in the back. "I have 32 slaves that arrived from the station above Arkathi Prime." Talia let out a slow whistle. That's a long journey. How is their health after that long trip? "As well as could be expected of slaves from the Quexite mines," Barathox replied. "Well, let's have a good look at them," Talia stated. Barathox led her into the room and toward another door along the back wall. It was disguised by a few boxes and a curtain that easily moved aside at the touch of a button. Opening the door brought out the usual stenches that clung to slaves. Body odor, waste, bad breath from poor diets, and in this case, Quexite dust. Inside was a small room, dimly lit and crowded with slaves of different species. Each wore a slave collar and chains that could stun a slave if they tried to remove them. Barathox gestured to the slaves. "Come on out and line up." Talia was surprised to find a human male among them. When he noticed her, she saw a look of disgust on his face. Talia walked down the line, inspecting each slave from all 4 sides. Once she was finished, she looked at Barathox and said, "I'll take them all." She handed a credit chip for Barathox to scan, and grabbed the controller for the collars. After Barathox gave her back the chit, they exited his room and walked back down the hallway to the main corridor. Several station guards provided an escort to her ship. As the slaves were being escorted down the corridor, an officious-looking Barantathi came hurrying up, trying to look important, and probably hoping for a bribe. "What are you doing? There's been no recent authorization for a transfer of slaves," the Barantathi exclaimed. Talia gave him a withering look, and pulled out a metal marker from her jumpsuit. Upon seeing it, the Barantathi stepped back and apologized before scuttling away. She turned back to see the human slave watching her. Talia opened the airlock of her ship and ordered the guards to begin strapping the slaves onto the benches in the cargo hold. But as the human approached the door, she had them put him and a Coritian in the cockpit, so she could keep an eye on them, and because the hold was full. After the slaves were loaded and secured to the benches, she walked into the cockpit and took her seat. The human started to say something, but she ordered him to remain quiet while she was undocking from the station. "Wouldn't want me to crash into the station," she joked. With her usual skill, she departed the station with no difficulties. She turned her ship towards the FTL exit spot. A spectacular crash between two freighters, as one was coming out of FTL and another just starting to jump to FTL, has led to setting up separate areas to jump in and out from. "What kind of a human transports slaves, you piece of filth?" the human male shouted. Talia remained silent until her ship jumped to FTL, and then she turned to her guests. She undid the shackles of the Coritian and smiled. "Been too long, Fuldy," and clasped hands with it. The Coritian rubbed his wrists as he replied, "Talia, good to see you. I almost blew my cover when I saw it was you." With a smirk, she turned towards the human and said, "Captain Talia Layton, welcome to the Harriet Tubman." She didn't think he'd get the reference, so she explained, "I'm one of several pilots that help smuggle slaves out of Barantathi and other slaver space." She continued, "And you, my friend, are riding the Underground Railroad." With a shocked look on his face, he asked, "Underground Railroad? But we're in space." Talia gave a slight chuckle. "It's a reference to a group of people that smuggle slaves to freedom in 19th century Earth." She indicated the Coritian with a nod. "Fuldy's been your conductor along the route." Fuldy inclined his head. As she reached over to unlock his chains, he sputtered, "So does this mean we are free?" Talia answered, "As long as we don't get caught." Fuldy laughed, "And anyone that stopped us would soon regret it." "So when you examined us, that was just show for the slaver?" he asked. "Berathox is no slaver. He's one of the stops along the way," she replied. "The examination was to make sure there would be no issues with fitting in my ship." "But you paid him. I saw." The man continued his questions. That wasn't for buying you. It's to help cover bribes and other operating expenses," she answered. "It comes from donations and other revenues." "I don't understand. Why weren't we told about this?" he asked. "We found it's better to wait until the last leg of the journey before telling them," she continued. "Many species aren't very good at hiding that they are escaping." "We learned the hard way that it's easier to wait," she continued. "So we set up beings like Fuldy here, volunteers that work their way into the slave population of a target, quietly organize things, and guide the slaves to freedom." "May I ask what it was you showed that official that frightened him so much?" the human asked. Talia pulled out the marker and showed him. He stared curiously at the alien script, and an alien skull etched on it. Talia explained, "It's the marker of the Dirtixin Syndicate, a very powerful criminal organization that dabbles in just about everything, but actual slave trading. We do favors for them, smuggling things in and out of various systems. In exchange, they let us use their sigil to scare petty officials. Why don't you go share the good news? Only remove the chains for now, in case we get boarded." Talia smiled at the sound of cheering from the back of her ship. That sound always made the risk feel worth it.